We're live.
Good afternoon. We are going to give everybody a chance to get into the Zoom room, and then we'll begin today's webinar. We are the Ageless Living Collaborative, and today we are going to be discussing color, texture, pattern. We've been asked so many times to really have a design-focused webinar, and so this is it. You asked, and we are listening. I'm Phoebe Stein, president of Olive Presents and co-founder of Ageless Living Collaborative. It's time to introduce our panel. We have David Ashen, who is my co-founder of Ageless Living Collaborative and also CEO of Dash Design. We have Faith Mirabella, who is one of our ALC collaborators. And when she's not collaborating with us, she's the CEO of WDC Interiors. Laura Busalacci from Brookdale Senior Living. Laura is one of our founding collaborators. And when she's not working with us, she is the Senior Director of Interior Services at Brookdale. And there's my dog. Kevin Swanson joins us from Hawthorne Construction Group. Kevin has been with us from the beginning. That's a big deal for us because we're almost 1 year old. And our guests today are James Bourgeois, who is the National Vice President of Atlas Maslin, and Dee Duncan, CEO of KB Contract and Keystone Brothers. Welcome. We are going to have a very loaded webinar today. We've got lots of information to share, lots of images to look at. I want to remind everybody who is listening that if you missed a webinar that we presented and you really wanted to see it, but you couldn't fit it in your schedule, you can always look at it if you go to agelesslivingcollaborative.org, and we have all the webinars on the website. All right, let's get going. We're going to kick it off with Faith. And you got to have faith, right? We're going to look at some images that look like something out of yesteryear. This is one of them. Here's another. We don't look like this anymore. So Faith, what do you see as the largest contributing influence when designing for senior living today?
So people who know me have heard me talk about I sound like a broken record, but how senior living really sort of steals from hospitality, residential, and healthcare. And given what sort of level of care you're designing for, that moves around in that Venn diagram between those three. How much, if you might have more healthcare in a nursing home, if you're doing that, or more towards hospitality, if you're doing independent living. And so, yeah, so here's some before and afters that I always think are fun. Like, no, we got swag and jabots, we got the red, we got the brass and glass chandelier. It was the only chandelier we could get of any size back in 1980. And then next to it, you can see, we were given a direction, like, let's get light and bright, let's change this up, let's, we get some neutrals and things like that coming in. The light fixtures are interesting, we've got some variety. The next one I love, the next slide, David.
Did it switch?
It did
Nope.
not.
It did not. There it is. Okay. So this was an activity room. And so Wellesley did this one, the first one, 30 some odd years ago. And it was that very traditional where everything had a pattern and you matched up that pattern. And it was a, home. And now this is a nursing home, but the drapes match the carpet match the wallpaper, and then here we turn it into, something that really was much more usable and functional as a multi-purpose room as they were really using it. And I think successful and some good contrast. And then this one was the typical country kitchen that we've all seen, that very, cutesy, I'm surprised we don't have border paper in this one. That was, with that was really big for a while. And then now we've got got acrylic top tables. They glow. They're great for contrast against the floor. We got some Zudi art, those sort of things. And then with the the light fixtures. there. So we're, yeah, we've come a ways, you know, now from
Well, and it looks
where
like
we
you've
were
gone
borrowing.
into the light. You've gone into the light. Everything is much
The
more,
lighting is
you know,
great.
happy and
And so,
illuminated.
and it's great. And oh gosh, and as you know, Phoebe, we've talked about this. Lighting is going to be another whole. We'll do a whole nother thing on lighting too, because we could get at. So here, so you know, here we're looking at, you know, senior living, or is it senior living, or is this hospitality, or is this, you know, so we're seeing those designs that we're pulling. These are, you know, various examples we just pulled together that we're seeing, that we're pulling, you know. Yep, there's another, this is, you know, a senior living here. You know, we see the influences where we're talking about a lot of green and sustainability. You're seeing an honesty in materials. Again, the lighting is really great. So,
Well, let's
you know,
talk about that. I mean, Laura, you know, talk about this product that has really changed over the years. I mean, what are some of the things you're seeing with new product that's assisting in making this more interesting? I mean, this is not an image that we would have seen even 5 years ago in senior living.
So a lot of the product that's been coming out that we're seeing has more patterns and textures within. So meaning that wall tile has come out with interesting patterns that are on top of the tile. So between that and some of the furniture pieces and the carpet being more textural, they're all assisting in bringing senior living into a different transformation.
Well, the one picture certainly looks like a hotel. And now that you know that it's senior living, maybe more people will say, oh, so we don't have just mauve and sea foam anymore. We could maybe live there. James, is there a right or a wrong answer as it relates to pattern, content, and scale in senior living? We're looking right at carpet right now. So talk to us about pattern and scale.
Well, I think that's a loaded question, and really it depends on the level of care. If you're thinking about memory care and you're thinking about a corridor, for example, you know, obviously movement's going to play an important part in memory care. You have to think about scale. You have to think about color and how it affects seniors and how they take in light. Texture is a very important topic when it comes to picking materials. Sometimes there are seniors that use walkers, for example. And then on the other side, if you look at assisted living, it really depends on many other things. And I think traveling around the United States, it appears that there's a lot of gray area in regards to how people approach this topic. And I think a lot of it depends on brand ownership groups and what they're trying to accomplish. Obviously, it's a very competitive market, and they're trying to get their occupancy numbers up. And then I think Faith said this before, and it's critical to our industry. I call it the blurring of the lines between senior living, hospitality, multifamily. I'm even seeing workplace influences in senior living.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Well, there seems to be a conversation about the three, and they're interchangeable: hospitality, multifamily, and senior living. And that's a new dialogue as well.
In fact, if I may expand on that, what we talk about is living, because, you know, the blurring of the lines, like I just spoke about, you know, it's happening across the country. We have many influences that are coming, maybe non-science-based designers that are getting in the market and really learning on the job. And I say that respectfully to these designers, but you know, that's really what's going on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it, certainly. Dee, how do you determine design scale in fabric development for senior living environments?
Well, yeah, as he was saying, there's all kinds of new and different aspects of it. You know, and these guys, the design group here, are as great as they come. And if in James's area where the carpet may have huge designs, you're going to feather other things in, unless you're someplace like the Greenbrier Hotel or the old Laura Ashley looks. But for most of the time, you know, small scale chairs limit themselves to smaller designs. Lounge chairs are bigger designs, and you're seeing a lot of big design on the backs and different types of fabrics in the seating and the fronts. And then like on here, you see the larger, more fun patterns that may be on a sofa or really used more and more at pillows, but you are seeing texture, texture, texture. From a fabric standpoint, texture is the key. Whether it's a soft texture, whether it's a design texture, or whether it's a texture that just is for functionality.
Yeah, and the layering of those, creating a visual interest and depth is really what's happening.
And it's a big change from when everything was the same color. So that's definitely a modern influence. Kevin, how do you take an image and create a pattern that's not so literal? And you have your influence like this.
Right. So this was in our little downtown of Berrien, Washington here. We went to lunch and I just took some photos of a week or so ago. And as my inspiration, I thought, well, this is really interesting. So I think prior to the last maybe 5 or 10 years, even maybe more like 5 years, is patterns seem to be really, really literal as far as like what they were trying to represent. They were finding a photo or finding an inspiration of what a something, and it was just completely literal copy down. And I think what we are yearning for as designers is something that will give you the impression or an inspiration, but it isn't going to be so obvious of what it kind of came from. I think that's sort of the magic of design. So the first one was a cedar tree. This is just, of course, a bark and moss on a tree here, which is great. Here is a metal textured grate that is around the base of a tree. And you know, the repetition, it also has an idea of a decade, the 20s. And here's just a shadow as the sun comes through a park bench. So David, the next, yeah. And I thought, well, that's even kind of a great texture and inspiration from, it's like a secondary impression of something original. And so I kind of just love that whole idea as well. So taking these photos now, and if we move to a couple more photos, here is an adaptation of potentially that park bench shadow. You know, it isn't literal, but you can kind of see where it was coming from if you were to show the inspiration. But having that something literal like that, I think could almost be more conflicting with the eye or movement, and especially in senior living, we don't need that. Now the one on the right, obviously these are all the colors available in that particular pattern, but it kind of made a cool picture with all the different colors. That one, exactly. The next photo, of course, this is almost more literal, but it isn't quite. This is, of course, the bark, or you know, sand or earth or something like that. Which doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, but this is a wonderful pattern to be used in senior living for corridors or for a space that you just don't need a lot of emphasis on the floor, but just sort of a workhorse, let's say, carpet on the floor. But this is lovely because you get some texture, you get some variety of colors. In this carpet, you can have a thread that's a barber pole. For those of you who don't know that, it's spiraled to different colors. So you get multiple colors and different effects. And if you tip shear it, don't, whatever, this can be a wonderful pattern that can bring a lot of life to a community, but yet be very neutral as well.
Mm-hmm.
Next. So this was the metal grate. And so, yes, there were circles in the metal grate, but that was such a constricted or so confined detail that here are some ideas of both. One on the left is fabric and one on the right is of carpet, where you can get other inspirations from this. But I think this is a really good adaptation of that grid. It's a repetitive pattern of a shape, different sizes and whatnot. And I think these can be used in a variety of locations. The fabric on the right could be used on a smaller scale chair. Of course, the flooring on the right, sorry, my right, left, could be used in a larger space, perhaps dining rooms, lounge callouts, elevator callouts, or bump outs like in maybe corridors, just to give you this an idea of direction or whatnot. But again, inspiration is there and you can kind of see it, but it isn't, again, meant to be so literal.
But when you see the inspiration, you can
kind of really see it.
Look at it and see it with a different eye. It's very exciting. Yeah.
I really do love this one because on the left or on the right, sorry, is more literal to the cedar. This is, of course, a carpet pattern, but it not totally. But what I love on the left, the fabric, you can kind of see that overall shape of that cedar branch, let's say, and it's, I don't know if it's literal, well, what I'm trying to say is you can really see those shapes in there. And I can see where the inspiration of that cedar branch would certainly be coming out on that left image of that fabric. So again, it doesn't need to be an exact replica, it just needs to kind of give you that idea of a direction based upon nature or something man-made.
Those were great. Thank you.
Oh, and so here is an inspiration of a carpet collection I was putting through, or I put through, and you can actually kind of see all of my photos based in this. So the larger one on the bottom could be that metal grid pattern. The one on the upper right could be the shadows. And then the one on the upper left could be like the bark. And so they all can work together in a cohesive building. So you have upper right is corridor, upper left is going to be my activity or minor spaces. Of course, the bottom is going to be my lobby and dining room.
Great.
Kevin, I'm curious, what level of care are you using these materials?
These materials are going to go into mostly of an independent living communities, kind of a middle of the road demographic. However, they do have some residents there that you would think would be put into an assisted side because of their age, but they still can function without having any medical care or any aids from a resident assistant or anything. So these are being used in mostly independent.
Kevin, that's a great walkthrough of how to take nature and turn it into design. I mean, that's just a great talk on that.
Thank you.
It's fun because I think we could all see all of those inspirations in the selections that Kevin shared. I want to remind everybody, we have a Q&A crawl going, and if you want to ask anyone on the panel a question regarding any of the subject matter or something else that has to do with color, texture, or pattern, please do write a question and we will answer it during the webinar. Laura and Faith, you guys love color, and we know colors come and they go. The aforementioned seafoam, thank goodness it went. What are you seeing in color trends and patterns today? What's the look ahead?
So we used to see a lot of warm neutrals, and now they are a combination of warm and cool neutrals. So there's a lot right now with blues mixed with mustard yellow against a cool neutral background. There's playing around with bright colors and very saturated colors for accents to make a focal point. So that's kind of, without getting into like the mauves used to be and the seafoam and getting into specifics, that's just kind of a swing overview versus getting specific, because I think it turns into more of a demographic.
And I'd say, so I agree. I mean, I always called it beige texture. We lovingly, if somebody, that's the biggest insult in our firm, if you created something that's beige texture, because it's tan on tan on tan, because we had clients who said, I wanted to be warm and inviting. And so they wanted to see all those warm tones all at once, all the time with all the wood tones. And I'd say, I walk into those places and it feels sticky. I mean, like you're walking in honey, you know, it's just sort of, I love honey, but you know, not to walk in it. So I think it's one of those things that now it is that balance where we're bringing in those cools, we're getting some of those contrasts, we're understanding where we can use contrast and not introduce movement that's going to, you know, disrupt anybody, whether it's mobility or, you know, but the other thing that I think is that with trends and patterns is, like we're going to go back to, is really textures. I mean, you can see here, we're really down to textures. Even we have these beautiful colors and we can use all these. These feel good. I mean, the years past, we had Krypton and it didn't, I mean, it was the old Krypton. It felt like plastic coated fabric, and
but it's not crunchy anymore.
It's not crunchy anymore.
It has a gorgeous
beautiful things. We have silicone that drapes beautifully. We have all these beautiful vinyls and even, you know, hybrids of different kind of vinyls, because we're looking at, you know, again, more sustainable things. So that sustainability has, you know, crept into all of those colors and patterns, and everybody's really, you know, getting involved with nature and out. And, you know, before we were even talking about recycling, all of that stuff, especially after this last year, we realized how important the outdoors is and how much we bring the outdoors in and how much we bring the indoors out, extend those spaces that we have indoors to be like outdoors. So we can have those experience indoors in December in New England, but still enjoy it.
Keep
So
going, David. Next slide.
next slide.
Yeah, keep going.
Well, wait a second. I have a question, so we have to answer it. Lynn Pierre asks, how do you share with young designers the limitations of high contrast colors and designs for senior living?
It's tough because it's where you use it. Because if you read the old books, we've gotten beyond that. I mean, it's like, yes, you don't put a black line where you don't, you don't want high contrast on the floor because people will perceive it as a level change. And all you have to do is a lot of times you can see you blur your own vision and know like, oh, that's not a good transition. And on the flip side, you can teach your designers that could be used to your advantage. If there's a place you don't want residents to go, darken that carpet, lower the lighting. That's a place that's just for staff. No one will be drawn to that space. So you learn how to use it and where to use it. And just that contrast of, I say keeping it fresh. I think there's a part that we're talking again, not too sticky with those tones. So I think but it's one thing that I think you keep working with them. And then I've kept learning from it too. I'm sure Laura and Kevin have run across it.
I think
absolutely.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Laura, just one second. I was going to say, if you're ordering a sample of carpet and you don't see much of the carpet on the sample, order a huge piece of sample of that carpet so you don't end up with snakes on the floor like I did.
Right. Yeah, and I think with younger designers, there's a conversation that needs to be had regarding layering, what that looks like, what it can turn into. Not everything needs to draw attention or it gets very haphazard. So, if your carpet is very interesting, other things need to complement and not distract. So figuring out what your focal point needs to be. And that's something that is learned. It's not something that you just know right away. I think a lot of times when you're fresh out of college, you want everything to be fantastic. So just the fixture, just the countertop, and you're looking at it as like bits and pieces versus cohesively. And that's something that needs to be guided.
And that was one of those things when we were putting this presentation together, we said, oh, we can show all these things that we're using, but that's why I wanted to include the bigger picture of these spaces so you can see the balance of them in the overall. That you're looking at it and you got, here's something great, and then the rest of it could be kind of sedate, or or when we're looking at James' pictures where pattern becomes your layering. Small patterns can look like texture, big patterns can really be so it's all that layering also with materials or even kind of with the elements in mind. Again, sustainability sneaks in, but it's like not everything needs to be wood, not everything needs to be metal, not everything needs to be carpet, not everything needs to be soft. We've got stone in there, we've got so there's that layering too, which I think is really important, which adds to our textures.
And Dee's fabric box, if you can go back to that image, David, that's a great image. The other one that's got the blue with the texture. Nope.
Well, like I'm having computer lag, so
I'm so happy I have all these.
That one.
There.
I mean, that's a nice layering of texture, interest, and giving you some examples of what that looks like.
And warm gray, because we're allowed to use gray now. Everybody doesn't automatically think of airport. There's people, that people have brought gray into their homes, so now we can use it and still feels like home. So
I wanted to quickly mention too on that, you can also do your contrast, like Faith was saying, with the actual structure, stone, the wood. So let's say in this particular instance, if you wanted to maybe have a contrast for visual interest contrast, and it isn't happening in the fabrics, you do a darker or a lighter type wood or a darker, lighter type construction piece, so either in your furniture or in your structure, and you have a built-in then contrast that is going to give you the depth, visual depth, or visual excitement in the space versus putting a bunch of different fabrics or patterns in there.
So Dee, we're looking at some beautiful KB fabrics. Do you see a consistent color selection for senior living?
I think it's about as consistent as this panel. Um,
That's fair.
Total.
I guess I'm the safe one to ask that question. I can tell you from sales wise and looking at that, there are certain trends and there's still some very consistent, as you mentioned, the earth tones and the things, but a friend of all of ours, Rachel, told me a while back, because I was kind of new a few years ago, learning more and more, was trying to tailor lines. And I think what she was saying and what everyone else here has proven is that there are no rules anymore. The color palettes are exploding. What used to be written rules are not written anymore. And it's been fun the last day or so talking with all of these people of who likes what and who doesn't like what. And
there are some colors. There are some colors we won't use. Like when you saw blush and corporate, you're like, great, go for it. We've been there. We've done that pink. We've done that mauve. We've done, those colors. So it's good. It's in the palette for other people, but for, we'll be like, we're still taking that out.
Yeah.
But just like this is an earth tone, but is this all earth tones, or is it more texture, or is it anyway? But we show a lot of fabric, but we also show a lot of faux leathers, and that's extremely hot. Those kind of trends and designs goes back to nature again, and goes back to. But is there any consistent anymore? No. I think there's still some do's and don'ts. And as you mentioned, those old rules about lights and darks and keeping people from going where they want. But I think for the large part, I think it's become a lot more fun. There's, I think there's some issues that are more regional. I think you've got a lot more regionality than you had before. And I think we might talk about that on this at some point.
Well, I'd like to jump in on this conversation, because I think it's very interesting, and I do agree with Dee in that I'm seeing all types of things, and for our science-based designers like Laura and Faith, there are some things that you guys will just not do. And what I'm seeing around the country is people taking chances not only in pattern content but also color, and in many ways breaking the rules that we 5 years ago would have never done.
And some of those are good and some of those are not. So, depending on the product type. So if I'm independent living, assisted, memory care, depending if I'm new construction or if I'm a renovation. So all those nuances play into what's appropriate, how far can I push the envelope? The average resident in an existing property is 85, 86. So it's, we're not pulling from the low 60s, high 60s. They're higher. They want to stay home longer. So being acutely aware of what you're designing in and who you're designing for needs to be front and foremost in this industry. It's not such a hot topic in other industries, unless I guess you're in residential, then it's like a really hot topic, but which is why I'm not in that industry. But yeah, making sure that you're acutely aware of who's going to occupy the space or who is occupying the space.
And also who's running the space. I mean, there's places like, I'm surprised, I pulled some photos and but I'm seeing like a lot of light carpets, and I'm like, I don't think my clients will let me get away with white's great. Everybody's using white. White's beautiful. It's bright. It's a color again, we can use it. But there's a certain, you only want a carpet to be so light because you only want to be cleaning it so many times, no matter how great the fiber is. The fiber can be awesome, but if you're there and you're constantly, your staff is worried about the finishes in the room and not on, and their focus isn't on, the resident, then we fail.
Care.
Well, and that's that would be a big example of the fact that we may have trends in senior living, but we're never quite trendy.
Some of the,
Yes,
but
good
some of the
point.
colors,
Yes.
some of the colors, because of some of the new finishes, you're now allowed to be able to spill something and get it up. You're now allowed to have some moisture barriers. And I think that's allowing people in certain places to push that envelope or
Mhm.
put that white.
I-
on the surface.
I'm
Right.
so glad you brought that up because that was the thing. It's like now, I can do a light seat, because it is impervious. It is one of those things that's not going to absorb. And so now I can get that contrast off my mid-tone carpet or my, so those things are now an option for us because, we can't, it will sustain up, that is going to be durable, durable that leads to sustainability, so yes.
Well, I'd like to add one point. I think we all would agree that we have a responsibility to our customer, which ultimately is the resident. But let's be honest, I mean, sometimes there is a conflict between creatives and what a operating group wants, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
I mean, and I think it's important to make the point that this may not, if you know the maintenance history of this community, this may not be the right color that will work for this community. So I think that's a fair point.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that goes both ways. That can be, from the designer or the client wanting something that's not, appropriate, so it can go, we all have to educate each other.
Well, and it's not just the color itself, but it's the cleaning of the color. If you decide you want that white couch, you can have it. It will feel beautiful. You can spill on it, but somebody has to be cleaning it properly
Mhm. Mhm.
for it to be restored to looking beautiful.
Absolutely.
Phoebe, properly is the key word.
Yep.
Exactly. Exactly.
I was-
Well, let's talk a little bit about multicolor versus tone on tone colors for senior living. Dee, what do you think about that?
Well, again, we're seeing, it depends on the application. We're seeing that tone on tone, while it gives you a bigger pattern, it gives you a bigger coverage, we're seeing more and more, it's still a solid, it's just giving more texture. I think that we're seeing more tone on tones than we are multicolors.
Mhm.
And where that may not be as great on design, but it's better and easier on the eye. And I think from a design standpoint, even with this texture you just showed, there's a couple of them, a couple of colors in it, but we're seeing really more tone on tone than we are the multicolors.
Mhm. And that's not just the fabric. David, if you go back to a couple of slides,
Which one?
back to the wall with the wood and the
Ah, yeah.
stone, because that's a really great example of the tone on tone also. And we're moving through.
You just got to have enough contrasting
There you
color
go.
values.
There you go.
know? You just got to have enough contrasting color values to show off the.
Mhm. And so you've got the fabric completing that picture. Faith,
Yep.
I know you have a lot to say about tone on tone.
Well, I think it's great because again, when we're talking about sort of when you use contrast and when you don't, and I love that we now have the opportunities to use a lot of tone on tone. That because there is that agitation that happens, if you get too much contrast in something, it can be pretty happy, but it can be much. We've got to, and we get beautiful patterns. And I'm so glad that we do multiple colorways from, all of our manufacturers, because I could look at it and go, that's great. But I've got the tone on tone version of that pattern. It's like, I can use this. The other one is over here moving like crazy. And I think, I guess, for young, that movement, I guess, is really, you look at it and your eyes go a little, you're kind of like, wait a minute, what's happening? It looks like an optical illusion. We don't have any examples of it here. Thank God. I didn't want anybody, to get ill. But they can be really fun. And it's also knowing where it's going. Like, to Kevin's point, order a big sample of something, because you can put it down. And when you get far enough away from, like up close to me, go, ooh, I don't know. And then you go, oh, kind of like where we had the fabric too, with all the different colors in it. You pull it away, that becomes a neutral. You pull away some of these fabrics, they become a texture. Some of these, the flooring. So some of those things that you like, even this one here, you see lots and lots and lots of color, but it becomes a texture. So it almost is playing this, I don't know, it's an imposter tone, it becomes an imposter tone. So I'll come up with something
Dave-
clever about that next time.
Well, I know,
David, if you go down to, I want to say it's 34, 36.
wow, the fact that you have these. numbers is
36, go
amazing.
to 36, that
There
one.
you go.
There you
So
go.
that's, I mean, that has, if the pattern on the left had more color in it, more contrast, it's gonna more than likely be too high of a contrast. Where this is a nice tone on tone and it gives you interest without being overpowering.
Yeah. And I like to add too, I think one of the things that this is going to sound very narcissistic, but I think I'm very, very good at my fabrics and picking fabrics out. And I really like to throw in a little bit of color or pattern into a neutral tone, but you kind of have to School of Hard Knocks in a way. You have to kind of go through it a couple of times to really understand where it's going to work or not. Like, again,
Right.
back to that, getting a larger sample, or like this carpet situation. It's like, if that fabric is going to really maybe not successfully bring a little bit of interest into the room, or a little bit of a visual interest into the room, if it's too much, you're going to fail. If it's too little, you're not going to get the effect you want. And I think bringing some of those multicolored textures in that Dee has, I think is great, because it can also be a chameleon that will maybe bridge you to another space that you're walking to or through, or perhaps maybe can highlight the element you're going to bring in for maybe your pop of color. Anyway, so it's almost,
Can we
it's a
stay
fine
on
line.
Pop of color though? I want to stay on this for a second,
Cool.
because James and I had a little bit of a conversation about color and it stimulating or soothing or exciting or adding drama. Can a creative take this too far?
Oh yeah, I think that's what Laura was saying. I mean, you get that kind of but
Mhm.
you guys go ahead.
If you go down to the next slide, David.
Well, wait a second, let's stay there. What if is it too far across the board in senior living? Or would it be dependent on level of care? Could you have something more bold in independent living than you have in, say, assisted or a memory care?
So, I mean, if you were doing a community in Miami,
Mhm.
you're gonna bring it. You're gonna bring
Right,
it now.
well said.
You
Well,
are
that's what
going
they're
to
used
bring the
to.
color
South
from
Beach, yeah.
Miami in an
Yeah.
independent living property.
Okay.
Now,
If that profiling,
memory
I'd be
care, D, what?
If that profiling, I'd be careful.
It's regional.
No,
I'm
but it's
doing a
really true,
regional deal.
yes.
Yeah,
I'm doing a regional deal. If you're doing a memory care in Miami, you're gonna have to dial it back. It cannot be a bling bling, or it's gonna overstimulate, and the residents, who's the client, isn't gonna be able to function appropriately in that space.
And it was
So-
like Kevin saying that the sort of the unfolding of the rooms of your journey through these spaces. You might have a space that's really calm and it might even look boring, but off of those other spaces, you might have some things that, are the arrival points where you have a little bit of drama, where you have I love this picture of the contrast here with the dark wall. Because also we were talking about, high contrast, but that's also important to show the difference between where the wall is and where the floor is. I mean,
Sure.
when you're walking down a corridor, that's very important to know that.
Mhm.
The other thing we talked about was the difference between senior living and hospitality is these products sit here longer. So
Yes.
with this neutral carpet and the accent wall, paint is easy to change. So you can easily freshen a space where if you have a particular color, it goes out of style. Carpet sitting there for 10 years, it could be problematic. And I walk through communities where the carpet's been there for 15 years. So
Eric,
Great.
let's talk about inspiration of color. So David, why don't you and Kevin kind of take us through the inspiration side of color?
David, go ahead. I'll let you go first.
oh. I like
Sorry,
your-
the slides.
They're so politic.
No, I mean, we always start with a story. So we're trying to be more localized in how we do it. So we're doing a project in San Luis Obispo. And in this case, It's one of the first Spanish colonial towns, or the earliest in California. So pulling the local colors in really helps us think about how we create something that's more local. So we go from understanding the story to creating a board that layers in the colors and the patterns and stuff that talk to this, rather than being this is a big brand, and rather than being kind of generic across the country, really trying to be localized and pay reference, but it also is more relevant for the guest or the resident who's most usually coming from this community. So that's certainly important. Kevin?
Well, exactly. I was going to say exactly the same thing. So when we're deciding, we kind of build the same sort of building wherever we build. It's just, of course, the interiors are going to be a little different. But you have to think of the geography. Where are you at? Are you on the beach? Are you in the mountains? Are you in the Midwest? Are you in California? Are you in Florida? Are you in Palm Springs? Miami, or are you like in Maine or Boston? So I mean, and all these are going to have a different look and a different tone just based on where you are, and you want to represent that in your interiors. There's also a social, economics, or a cultural difference. I mean, if you're in an area that has a different type of culture, you're most likely going to want to embrace parts of that culture into your interiors, and so you are going to have people walking in feeling comfortable that this can be their home, and not something that's completely different. So when like in Hawaii, you're not going to put a bunch of tractor pictures from my hometown of Moorhead, Minnesota, because they don't drive combines around there. Maybe they do, I don't know. And then and look, you have to kind of look at the population. Again, it kind of works with that. Is we will go tour an area and secret shop some of the competitors. I shouldn't say that very loud if there's anyone else on here, but kind of see where they're at and where they're going, and kind of predetermine, like West David, they went to that San Luis Obispo area and really did their due diligence of what is there, what's the culture like, what created the culture there. It looks like they have a bubblegum wall there as well, like they do here in Seattle. I love that. So these can all influence, now coming back to the story, sorry, I get on a tangent, what color and what you're going to present then to the operators, and what is going to be a successful building for them. They need to be able to be proud and excited to sell what you're providing them, and that's the only way that they are going to be able to be successful in their own right in filling a community with residents.
And it's the key part when you were mentioning culture, because you have cultures inside of cultures, especially, I mean,
Correct.
like here in Lowell, right down the river from where I live, there's the old textile mills, that all this sort of history that's very New England, but there's a big Hmong culture. We have
Correct.
Chinatown in Boston. I'm doing one in Brookline. I'm doing a project in Brookline. We have a lot of Russians and Chinese, so it's very like, oh, red, which maybe you wouldn't necessarily get. You kind of go, oh well, you kind of go, oh, this is fun. I get to use a color that we normally wouldn't use in this area, because I know that this very specific place is going to embrace this color.
Correct.
So getting to know the inhabitants, getting to know more than the inhabitants, just by then their level of care. You just, oh, they're Alzheimer's, they're saying, what is their interest? What are they doing? What is their culture bring to the table? So that's always a really great part of the micro, the regionality.
Just for a second, Kevin, you mentioned something that I think is very important, and obviously culture plays a big role, but also the motive of the ownership group, I think, is critical. And coming out of COVID, I think there's going to be a pent up demand of projects coming out, maybe third and fourth quarter. Do you find that they're trying to reinvent the wheel, maybe pushing you guys as creatives to really do something that sets that brand apart to improve occupancy rates?
I would say, I mean, I think one of the two major operators that I work with is, they want to create their brand, but they also do developments with other companies, and so ones will look very different than the others that they'll be operating. I also think that there's sometimes a high expectation of what they want and what they can really get, which is a little different too.
Is it cost, or is it
cost? And sometimes it's not necessarily the operator that's developing the building, it's a third party ownership that is doing it, and it kind of is up to them and what they're allowed to do. One thing I forgot to say, which is going to kind of inspire your color, and this is sort of a downer, sorry to say, but it's almost like what is available in the market
Yes.
for your products. So
Yes.
no offense, James and Dee, but you know, what's available in your carpet colors? What are they creating? What's available in your fabric colors? And I know it's all based on fashion. And so we kind of follow the fashion world. We're always kind of a year behind, I feel, with that as they develop the products for us. And so that can really determine, you know, what it is that you're doing. One other point, and then I'll be quiet, is that if it's a new build, you kind of have the world as your oyster. If it's a renovation, sometimes you may not have the funds to completely renovate the building. So you may need to work with some of the colors you already have in there in fabrics and or carpet or vice versa. And so your interiors are going to be really driven by what can you keep? And I say this a little like, it's sad, but it has to happen. I mean, and Laura and I both have are and were with operators. And so that's a reality that we dealt with a lot when I was with Emeritus Senior Living, that sometimes we just need to do part of it. And so you are driven then by what's available. And again, Laura had a comment the other day too, that we kind of agreed on, is you need to keep it familiar for your residents. So that it isn't such a big shock for them that it becomes an agitation and ultimately them maybe leaving the community. And so you don't want to mimic what you had, but sometimes there is a level of comfort you need to consider with your residents.
Yeah, and just to hop on to what Kevin said there at the end, based on your geographic location and to Faith's point, the background and history of the residents in the area, you can very easily over-design a space and make it, even though those residents are living in there, and make it feel like it's not their home anymore. So I think there's multiple facets that need to be taken into effect so that it's not too trendy, you know, not too hospitality. It's still inviting, it's up to date. It may not be as up to date as a brand new property, but you're pulling it so that it can grab hopefully younger residents. But that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's what we were saying about hospitality too. It's like there's a wide range in hospitality. You know, you've got boutique design where you walk in and there's a fuchsia water wall behind the receptionist. You're like, wow, that's awesome. Not every day. I wouldn't want to see that every day at my house, you know, walking in the front door. But then in also hospitality, you look at what are they doing in the rooms. Now you do want it to you want people to feel safe. You want to make them feel comfortable. And there's familiar things that are in the rooms that that people can rely on, you know. So even in hospitality, there is that migration of kind of wow to familiar.
But just to add on to what James, you said, I am seeing with a couple of my clients I'm working with that there is an emphasis on what happens when a potential resident and their children or caregivers are looking for a community. And what do they see when they walk in the door? So there's been a lot of focus on what happens at that when you cross the threshold, and what are you seeing when you're in the discovery room? What are you connecting out to? So I do have seen a lot of emphasis on that, and in some of the brands that I work with that have more generic designs, a real focus on distinguishing each property.
And we've been focusing a lot on the visual for design, but walking in that front door, what do you smell? What are you hearing? Is it loud? Is it chaotic? Is it, you know, think of all that experience when you walk in, because that is whether you're using a hard surface, you're using carpet, whether, you know, how furniture can contribute, your drapes can absorb sound, you know, so there's a lot to that crossing that threshold that you keep in mind. So thank God we don't have smell-o-vision, that we don't have to share that with everybody.
Lord. We have a question from Kate Candle. What's the current thinking on wall base? Should it be the color of floor or the color of the wall?
I like it to contrast with the floor because there's a change in plane.
Yeah,
that's my personal.
Faith, I like to tell people that I'm working with, or if they have questions like that, if a resident has some limitations with sight or just perception of depth, let's say, this is what I tell them. And I know I'm guilty of doing this, so I'm sort of dissing on myself. But if you do like a wall base or a carpet base, the same color as the carpet, they think they have 4 more inches of floor. So their scooter's going to hit the wall, or they're going to hit the wall. And like I said, I'm completely guilty of doing this because you kind of match the border. Now we're limiting the borders. So I really like the look of the picture we have down on the right, where even if it doesn't match the wall, Kate, it's a contrast from the floor to the wall. So they see that as something. If it matches the wall, it really, I think, causes problems. On the left, I think it's blended enough with the wall. You're not going to think it's the floor, and I think there's plenty of contrast between the floor to the wall. So both of these, I think, are successful. The one on the right may be more successful. This picture, thanks, David. I think here it's sort of this is sort of gray area. You're kind of walking the line a little bit of, yes, on the dark wall there's a contrast, but are they going to squint and see that wall base as the same as the floor and think and so when you have a wall color, here my question back to you guys is, if you change the color of the wall, do you change the color of the base?
Depends on the base. So
Correct.
if I'm a wood base, right?
No,
If I'm a wood
yeah.
base, I want to match my trim. So
Yep,
if my
exactly.
trim is white, my base is white. If I'm a vinyl base or a rubber base, then it depends on the environment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, well, we're kind of in this flooring mode, so we're going to stay there for a minute. James, there are two mindsets when it comes to making a decision about the amount of color in flooring. Down a corridor, one way. Why don't you pick it up? Where are you? Let me see. Here we go.
First, I
Let's
want to
talk
say
about-
hello to Kate Kendall. It's good to have you on, and thanks for the question, because I love that question about the base. That is something that comes up all the time, and really wanted to ask Kevin, and maybe I'll ask him offline about, and Laura, about the base as it relates to assisted living, because you can walk the fine line. It really depends on the community and what the focus is, and you know what I mean, the differences of the residents that are there. But back to the question, I think that you all have answered it already, and around the U.S., what I see is both schools of thought, and I think Dee said it. The rules have been kind of blurred, and I see some creatives and ownership groups that are using neutral colors down the corridors, and for obvious reasons. We just talked about it all. And I think what David said is perfect. They're looking for that flexibility to refresh. It's financially based many times. A lot of times things go out of style. David said that. Faith, I think you said keep it fresh, right? But it's critical to keep the space up to date, especially a corridor. There's so many square yards that are there. So I can see that frame of thought. And it's also just the ideology of the designer to design with neutrals. And then if you look on the other side, color on the flooring, something bright. Many folks, I hear them say that they want that excitement, they want that interest. And just like Laura said, I mean, I work with a operator in Orlando, and they bring it, just like you said, Laura. It's unbelievable. It's beautiful, and it's appropriate, right? So maybe it gets back to that whole cultural, where are we in the United States? What are the expectations of the ownership group? What are the expectations of the residents? And then lastly, you talked about the part of, which part of the country we live in or the community is based. And then I think Kevin even brought up the point about you have to consider the socioeconomic factors. And I think that's important as well.
It is important as well. And we were really going to dedicate a little bit of time to regionality, because that is such a big piece of the design for everybody. So why don't we kind of jump into the regionality? Faith, what other factors do you consider when designing for senior living in various parts of the country?
Yeah, so I mean, here's a New England home, and we love white. We've always loved white out here. The white trim and all of that, and how you would complement that, and what you see, and you can see the the patterning and the fun and the contrast of having the navies in there, sort of seacoast, but also I would say again, the materiality. What materials are around you? We're used to if you're seaside, you have sisal. Here in this picture we have shiplap walls. That's very appropriate for us because the materials that we're used to using. And I love it because now we can fake that. We have carpet people who can say, this has a sizal look. It has a feel like, like it's natural and sustainable, but it's tough. It's going to be this great fiber with a great backing. And, these fabrics that, again, that we've got that look very, given how you put them together. So I'd have to say, so that is really important, looking at all those little sort of those cues, because even though you want each room to kind of be a destination and you don't want to overdo it, you want a little bit of that, where you are. That regionality part is there from those materials. Wood floors, huge in New England, always have been. I love that carpet. People had come out with even wood that looks like carpet that looks like wood, awesome. Because now I'm over there going, but the acoustics, we got to do something. So I can have a look, or I can do an area rug that looks like it's inset to wood. And I'm using, a wood look, carpet with an inset of an area rug, which is a very, residential and very New England. So those are just some of those cues taken from New England. And, I can speak to other regions, but I've got experts on other regions here. They can speak to those.
David, why don't you weigh in on another region?
Well, I was talking again about this project in California, and I'm doing again one in same building typology, one in Portland, Oregon, and this is in middle of California. So these colors are more beachy. They pull in the colors, the accent colors pull in this colonial Spanish flavor. Where in Portland, we have deeper colors. We have, darker green accents. We have things that are more relevant to the community that we're in. It's a quote, greener, not literally greener, but it's a greener community. So being cognizant of that, and the materials that are a little more natural, a little more deeper.
It can be greener.
It can be greener. Yeah, so it's really important. And then looking at the furniture styles. So how does the fabric sit on the style? So if we have a sofa that has a little bit more of a, I would say a little mission style sofa, what's the right fabric on that? And how does that work? And what's the right pillow to contrast? And how do you keep things fresh? So in this palette, like the sofa fabric would be more of a neutral tonal thing, but the pillow adds the color and texture. But also when it gets old, you throw the pillow out and get a new pillow to freshen in a couple of years.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about getting rid of a pillow if it needs to be freshened in a couple of years. So that's going to lead me to the last question. And I want everybody to weigh in on it because it's important across the board. And that is longevity and how we plan for longevity in senior living, and how long is too long, and what works until then. We'll start at the top. Faith?
Oh, okay. So I thank you very much, David, for queuing up this picture. So this is a community we did 20 years ago. And I'm very proud of that because, you see everything's whitewashed nowadays anyways, but we knew that, and you see a lot of those insets of Oriental rugs, a really good Axminster classic pattern. If this were today, you go in, I don't know if this room is still like this now, but maybe we get rid of the skirt on the sofa. Maybe, but those 20 years, we probably have replaced that. That's probably, the legs or the arms have changed a little bit, but the room in its own is just really sort of classically stood. I think that, you can go in and it can do, maybe the curtains could be lightened up or something, but, so I think there's, thinking about some of those classic things, that longevity that we're talking about with working with neutrals too, a lot, so that you can, the things that do wear out quickly, like David was saying, pillows or changing paint. So I think that's, don't get fussy. I think that's another thing, like we were saying, like you're over designing each room, don't get too fussy. I think you'll get longevity out of a cohesive design, that people can use those rooms. And always, like I said, look at what industries are doing too, because I think that helps sort of temper trends. I think that really helps sort of look at that. But white kitchens are going to be around a long time. And a lot of us have been doing it in our own homes because we're like, I don't want to change, the cabinets and, however many years. And I don't want to, so bathrooms, any of those expensive rooms for us to redo we stay with, those classic sort of things, knowing that we can change out the other, with paint and, other little accoutrements. And then of course it's fun sometimes with retro colors too, kind of harkens back. So I think that I know other people have got a lot to add. So I
David,
will.
longevity, do you have any longevity tips?
Yeah, I like to use, I mean, for me, it's always about never being too trendy. I mean, my style tends to be a bit more modern, but I like to mix more eclectic pieces in. So again, I tend to use a base of neutrals layered with color, and then use pieces that are kind of like, I always think of like Katharine Hepburn is my kind of idol. I always think of this kind of very things that don't, like, they feel good, they can be a little worn, but you can always add accessories to freshen it up.
That's a great image. Laura?
Okay, so to both Faith and David's point, I had seen an image of a bathroom not that long ago, and the tile was very hip. It was very trendy. It had a really vibrant color, but it's a tile, and now it's on the wall. And more than likely, a couple years from now, it's not gonna feel appropriate because it's gonna go out. So to their points, where it's a high dollar space, keep it sophisticated, keep it clean, keep it fresh, inviting, and add your splash of color, your trendy, whether it's with the paint or its accessories. Something along those lines, something that doesn't cost a lot of money to redo.
Makes sense. Kevin?
Ditto on everything, because we're just now saying the same things. But when I worked in a showroom years ago, I had sold a manufacturer of fabrics called Brunswick Fils, and their motto was "Good design is forever." And so I kind of always hold on to that. And what does that exactly does that mean? Well, good design is something like David and Laura said. It's necessarily not trendy, not too traditional, not so trendy that it unfortunately, like a hotel or hospitality can be trendy, but that get changed out a lot more often. So maybe something more transitional. Same with me with David. You try to do clean lines, but you throw in maybe some traditional accents of case goods, which people collect antiques. They're always going to be something that's going to bring life to a room, but isn't ever going to go out of style. You can have a very contemporary, like out here, concrete, glass, and timber building, and you can put an antique Chinese piece in there and it looks natural. It looks like it's supposed, like, why didn't you put that in there to begin with? Kind of a situation. Even though we are kind of following fashion, maybe don't follow fashion as much, because fashion will always kind of go out of style after a season or two. And we don't want to get ourselves stuck with the mauve and green and geeses that we had when we all were growing up in the 80s. So I like what Faye said, take the skirt off the sofa, that harkens back a little bit to a trend that maybe isn't, we haven't seen skirts in a long time now. And so,
Thank God.
right, exactly. So
Right,
again, it's just
right.
pay attention to the lines of your furniture. And if it looks a little bit like, that looks like it was maybe developed for some sort of show house, maybe don't do it, because it isn't going to necessarily last the test of time. And then ditto on everything else.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of this is that allows a post-occupancy look back, what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah.
And then that's that classic design, knowing the difference between that classic and that trendy
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah.
So James, longevity. Any pearls of wisdom for flooring and longevity?
Well, I mean, everybody covered it, but I would say this may be a cliche way to say it. Timeless design, right? I mean, that's what you all said. I think I could make one point in that natural materials and manufacturers are coming out with products that look like natural materials. So if you use natural materials like stone or woods and different tonal values within the stone and wood and products that mimic those things, it's probably going to be effective.
Dee, you have the last word in longevity and likely the last word of the webinar.
So I'll come at it from a different standpoint. I'm hoping we've got a lot of new people to the industry and a lot of people that are learning and wanting to know, but I think we've seen, just make sure you're using the right products. Make sure your fabrics are meeting the right specifications for where Make sure you're using the right treatments, the top coats, all the things that you can clean it with the chemicals that we need in this type of an environment. So where color's great, leave it to you professionals. Design is wonderful, but just make sure that you're not putting rayon on a sofa that's not going to last 3 weeks. Make sure you're following those specifications and make sure it's cleanable to the specifications that you need.
Here, here.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, that has been an amazing conversation this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the panelists, to the collaborators, always bringing great content and sharing their learnings and their thoughts on everything senior living. And please save the date for next month. We will be discussing communities and reopening procedures, protocols, what it means for visiting your friends and family who are living in communities. And we will have some operators who are guests with our collaborators. So make sure to mark that down, June 24th. As always, we go live at 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you think somebody can value from this webinar, send them to our website, agelesslivingcollaborative.org, where we always have our webinars up within 24 hours of being live. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.